Welcome back, and here is a reminder of our top stories. President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning that Russia will expand aggression beyond Ukraine if not stopped. The Ukrainian president told the UN that Putin will keep driving the war forward and deeper.
Israeli airstrikes killed dozens in Gaza City and in hospitals as it expands its offensive. Women and children were among the 20 who died after a strike hit a building that was sheltering displaced families.
And Ogoni Consultation Committee submits report to President Tinubu. 4 Ogoni leaders get posthumous national honors and talks to begin on restarting oil production in the region.
Plus, dispute over land leaves residents of God's own estate and the nation's capital homeless after forceful eviction by security personnel.
Now for a review of what's making the headlines.
Well, you're watching Daybreak
in the papers this morning.
I love when this happens.
So do I. Shows the human side of the news. Vimbai, please take us through the headlines that are making the papers this morning.
That's right. I mean, Yolanda, if the escalator at the United Nations headquarters can fail and the teleprompter can break down and the audio can have glitches, who are we?
I tell you. I love that.
But of course, we're still going to... we're still going to deliver excellence to you. And so... It really is. But, you know, these things do happen. But let's get straight into it. We've got a lot of news to bite into today. And, of course, naturally, we do begin with our sister publication, This Day newspaper, the newspaper of record, which is leading with more events from New York. And, of course, this time around, the focus is around the speech delivered by Nigeria, by President Bola Tinubu, of course, who was very ably represented by Vice President Kashim Shettima, and the bold headline at the 80th Unga, Tinubu renews demand for Nigeria's permanent seat on Security Council. There are so many talking points, but I'll just quickly rush through a few of them before I head over to you, Yolanda, both Yolanda and Benga. I think this is a very big story that we all need to bring our voices to robustly. But, you know, the speech began by highlighting the fact that the United Nations was created in 1945 and how much the world has evolved since that time. You know, he put forward a case for institutional reform. And of course, this institutional reform is what would enable countries like Nigeria to be able to secure themselves a permanent seat on the Security Council. You know, there was mention of the fact that in 1945, Nigeria was a 20 million population colony. And Nigeria is now a sovereign nation with over 230 million people, set to be the world's third, most populous nation in a few years. So Nigeria can't be treated the same way it was treated in 1945. He also highlighted the disconnect between the words of the UN and the actions, and gave an example of how in past editions of the United Nations General Assembly, you started to see a break away from the main meetings taking place in the central room and, breakaway meetings now being the focus, just showing you it's an echo, I believe, that chimes in from what we've already heard from Donald Trump, we've heard from Zelensky, even William Ruto of Kenya, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa have all spoken about, this existential threat that exists with the United Nations. And last but certainly not least, in my summary, of course, he spoke about some economic policies that he thought would enable the global South to secure its rightful position in the global geopolitics. Number one, sovereign debt relief. Number two, the power of the markets to transform developing nations. I mean, I personally do not subscribe to any more sovereign debt immediate relief, because we've come this road, we've traveled this road before, and we sunk ourselves into more debt yet again. So there's deeper institutional reform that needs to happen within our own countries before we turn this into a habit of consistently going around asking for our debts to be relieved after we've mismanaged them. But that's my position. Yolanda, your key takeaways from that, I think, very, very exceptional outing for Nigeria at the United Nations General Assembly yesterday.
A very exceptional outing indeed. And, you know, I like to play the devil's advocate when it comes to stories such as this, because there's always two sides, and we have to look at both of them. First of all, you know, Nigeria is, saying that we deserve a seat on the Security Council. And you have people who are torn and have, opposing ideas on this. You have the people that say, yes, this rightly so. Nigeria is, as you said, leading in population, So we should definitely have some African representation that covers the amount of people that Nigeria has, to include Africa. But then you also have people saying, wait a minute, you have all these issues going on in your country. What makes you think you are legible to, have such a seat? Now, I'll also remind you that part of the countries that are permanent members of the Security Council are countries that are really, big in terms of having nuclear weapons, and they've really shown their strength and their might when it comes to war on a global scale. So it really just leaves the question, is Nigeria really credible enough to want to hold a seat, at the Security Council? But, to be positive, I think that it's a good step ahead. Africa is often looked down upon. Let me remind you as well, one of the highlights from one of the speeches that was given by an African head of state, which is Cyril Ramaphosa, mid into his speech, his mic was cut off. And a lot of people took offense to that, because it was like, hey, why would you cut off the mic of the president of a country? You're not doing that with other countries. He was speaking at the time, to give context, he was speaking at the time against the things that are being done to Palestinians and, recognizing it as a state, just as many other countries were doing. But it definitely wasn't a glitch, because the UN did mention the speaker's mic has been cut off. So maybe this is kind of what we need. We need more African representation, and especially with Nigeria leading with 200 plus million people, why not? I think we are credible enough to, have a say in what goes on the Security Council. Menga, I don't know what you think about that.
Well, we've seen that's a very strong, compelling speech from Nigeria's president, represented by the Vice President of Nigeria, Kashim Shettima, at the United Nations. But, at this point, I wonder if the United Nations still captures the global exigencies and the realities of our time. They say facts don't lie. Nigeria's population by 2030 is projected to be over 312 million. Africa's population by 2030 is projected to be about 1.7 billion out of the 8.5 trillion population of the world by 2030. So in a democratic campaign, in a global democratic campaign where you are calling for inclusion, how can Africa's voice be silenced? That's the biggest miscarriage of justice in this generation. Now you look at the different flashpoints of the world. Has the UN been able to deploy its global instruments to find solution to this crisis? We look at the Middle East, US, Israel and Palestine struggling over the Gaza city. People calling for the two-state solution. How have that gone to address the situation? We still see unabated killings. I think that's one of the biggest killing fields in the world right now. We've heard world leaders make statements. I wonder if people really understand the situation in Gaza. I was at the UN Security Council in 2014, and I was to report about the Israel-Palestinian debate. And I said, I'm tired of hearing this two-state solution. I really want to know what's behind the scene. And I remember the permanent representative of Nigeria's permanent representative to the UN then, Professor Joy Ogu, took me to the head of the political affairs department of the Nigeria's mission and the UN. And by the time he brought out the graph to me, I discovered that I think it's more that the exigency is more than a two-state solution. We have Palestine inside Israel. We have Israel inside Palestine. I wonder if a lot of people are aware of this geographical complexity. So I think diplomats need to have a rethink. They have to have they need to deploy a rethinking. They need to wear their rethinking cap to find a sustainable diplomatic solution. We have the outbreak of climatic crisis in the world. What kind of solutions do we have? Yet we have different countries playing politics about carbon emissions. Then we talk about the security, the problem of Sahel. How far has the United Nations been able to address these problems? We could go on and on and on. I think it's time for world leaders to come together.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Unga. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, in all of this, you know, there's no crisis that's more important or that's superior to any other. However, we see this continued focus on Russia, Ukraine, Israel and Gaza. We're dealing with the situation in Sudan here at home. We're dealing with a situation in Eastern Congo here at home. So I think my biggest criticism of all is really I would have loved to see our African leaders spend a little bit more time educating the world about some of the issues that we have here at home that need multilateral intervention and that need the political will from the world to get us, you know, as involved in the peace processes as we are getting involved in the Middle East and Russia, Ukraine. But, you know, like they say, these are PhDs, these are doctorate topics on their own. So we could talk and talk and talk for hours and be able to explore so many different facets. But, you know, thank you so much for your input on that. And I hope we'll be able to get some live updates from the UN, if not today, on another day. Now, still on the front page of this day newspaper, we are looking at the NUPRC, who is refuting a statement. If you remember yesterday, the Punch newspaper had led with a story about 8.41 trillion naira in losses from crude oil. So today, this day is leading with NUPRC refuting that 8.4 trillion naira oil theft report. And they're saying crude losses cut by 90% in 4 years. However, when you dig deeper into this rejoinder that has been issued by the commission, you find that, you know, it's a little bit more of semantics than anything else, because they do seem to acknowledge the fact that, you know, the barrels lost, as reported by the Punch newspaper yesterday, were correct. However, they are disputing the figure of 8.4 trillion naira because they are saying that the newspaper used today's exchange rate to calculate losses of 2021. Of course, we know in 2021 the exchange rate was 430 naira. It's now 1,500. And they're saying that their methodology also doesn't account for crude price fluctuations. And lastly, they're saying that the newspaper, in their own estimation, by the way, say that they failed the integrity test because they didn't go out and get a comment from the commission before going to press. So I think it's important to balance that out and say that it seems that they do agree on the fundamentals, which is the barrels, the thousands of barrels that are being lost per day as recorded over the years. However, the dispute is now on the computation of that 8.4 trillion naira figure, where they're saying that no, you can't use, you can't manipulate the exchange rate by using today's exchange rate to calculate 2021's losses. Unga, your take on what is becoming a back and forth between the NUPRC and the media?
Okay, my namesake, Mr. Unga Komalafe, is a well-respected engineer. He's spearheaded a lot of reforms in the Industry Act. I have attended a lot of his seminars where he's been able to throw some light into the relevant portions of the Petroleum Industry Act. But be that as it may, I think that communications need to be clearer, you understand. It reminds me of that playground rhyme, do not say yes when you mean to say no. I think there is need for transparency and clarity in all this. We understand that the security agencies have done a lot by reducing crude oil theft by 90% in the last 16 years. That's good enough. But to waste time when there are serious issues of leakages to the biggest economic pipeline in the country, I think that we should be much more committed in fighting the ills of governance so that Nigerians could benefit from this. We have the president going chumps in a bit with the report, with the good reports coming from the non-oil sector, the revenue from the that he has achieved 90% of the targets, and we have also seen a special intervention project being released. We saw that the social implementation plan, the social register being given to poor and vulnerable people. But this is the biggest concern of the economy, crude oil theft. And the president was very sincere enough and very frank when he assumed office that the security agencies should tackle crude oil theft, because that's the biggest drain, that's the biggest pipeline drain of the economy. And I think instead of wasting time on the figures or playing semantics on this issue, I think that we need to see the security agencies and the relevant agencies for that matter to go down there and block every leakages that is connected to Nigeria's crude oil wealth.
Now, Benga, what better way to give this clarity than to, be transparent with the data? This is a wonderful opportunity to come forward with standardized reporting, to show people what is truly happening instead of just coming out and, giving a media statement. That is not enough. You really have to back up what you have to say. While we were taking the report earlier on, the part that I did like was the fact that they did mention the difference in the rate from the naira to the dollar and how it was varying from year to year. So that made some excuse that made sense. But I think ultimately it would be very nice to have some actual reports and give the public and the press the opportunity to ask questions, to keep them accountable and to say, look, this is where we are uncertain. This is where you can provide clarity. I think that would be great as a step forward into that communication that you speak about, Benga.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw, we applauded Zakade Deji of the Nigerian Revenue Service for the interaction that he had with the press the other day. And maybe this is something that we want to see more of coming from the NUPRC, because, again, they do publish their numbers, but these numbers can be subject to interpretation, as you're rightfully saying, Yolanda. So maybe some regular media parleys might help us all to be on the same page, and will also enhance a spirit of trust, accountability, and credibility as well between the NUPRC and the public. But let's stay on oil, however, with a different theme. This day newspaper reports it as 31 years after their murder, Tinubu honors Ogoni 4 with national awards. This also dominates the front page of New Telegraph. New Telegraph reports it as FG moves to restart oil production in Ogoniland. Of course, we all know the story of Ogoniland and the story of the Ogoni activists who were led by Ken Saro-Wiwa, who were gruesomely executed. And earlier in the year on Democracy Day, the president had moved to pardon Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 8, and they were also granted national honors. Ken Saro-Wiwa was granted the CON, and the other 8 were granted OON. Now we see 4 additional activists being honored with the CON. But beyond that, we're also seeing this announcement to commence oil exploration in Ogoniland. I watched an interview last night from a senator from the area who was saying that under no circumstances do they want to see Shell return to Ogoniland. So it'd be interesting to see which companies they'll be engaging. However, when you speak to the Ogoniland people themselves, and especially some of the activists that are still there, they are alleging that the cleanup is not yet sufficient. They're saying they're not yet happy with the level of environmental restoration that has taken place in that area. Before anybody new can come in, they're saying, yes, we need the economic activity of the exploration and new investors coming in. However, what we've seen already, the damage that has been done, has not yet been cleaned up 100%. Yolanda, what do you make of this?
You know, I happen to have had a front row seat to some of that cleanup, and how bad it is. I remember doing a documentary in that region some time back, and the waters, the land, the region is just vast, and the amount of pollution that is in the area is so saddening. You know, this thing that has happened with this historical reconciliation of, it's wonderful, what the president has done, but the damage has been done on such a tremendous scale that I'm not sure if the region will be able to properly, just come out of it and be anew. It's really difficult to speak on it when you've seen it firsthand, because it's difficult to find the words to express what the eyes have seen. But it's a step forward. It's positive. People of the area saying that they don't want Shell anymore. They're allowed to do that. I have seen protests where in Europe people are going against Shell and even saying that, the pollution that they have caused, the damage that they have caused, the lives that have been lost, so much that has been going on in that area. So it's really so many angles to look at it from. And I don't know if, Menga, you have something to add to that, because there's just so much to touch on.
Yeah, it leaves a deep concern.
Benga, you know what? Our time is actually fast spent, and I want you to comment.
Okay, let me just drop a one-liner, if you wouldn't mind.
Just give me a one-liner, sure.
Yeah, I want everyone to focus on the question Adisu Morowan, our State House Villa correspondent,
Yes.
that she used in ending that report yesterday. If the promises in Abuja would address the injustice, the environmental degradation in Ogoniland. I rest my case.
Wow.
Very beautifully said, and that's the apt way for us to dissect this issue, because we want to rush into oil exploration, we want the economic activity, we want the revenue from the oil, but what does it mean for the average citizen of Ogoniland? At what cost exactly? Wenka, I'm going into your territory now. We're going to Punch newspaper, and as much as Punch newspaper also leads with oil news, it's speaking about NNPC securing some oil exploration investments. I want to focus on the coronation of the Olubadan of Ibadan land as Oyo gears up for this historic coronation. Now, we know that former Governor Ladoja is celebrating his 81st birthday in seclusion today as part of the preparations for the coronation. We know that the president's advance team has already made their way to Ibadan in preparation for this massive event. Gwenga, if you can just let us into some of the intricacies of the coronation of the Olubadan of Ibadan land.
Okay, well, I think all attention, all eyes is on the coronation that will be taking place in less than 24 hours from now in Mapo Hall in Ibadan. And I think that preserves the beauty, the tradition, the legendary, the lavish cultural pride of the Yoruba people. Ladoja, who was a former governor of Oyo State, will be getting coronated as the 44th Olubado of Ibadan. When you look at the historical lineage of Ibadan, it was founded by in 1820 after the alliance between Ife, Egba, and Ijebus were able to fight the Fulani invasion, and they gained control of the land in 1829. So when you look at the traditional lineage and the process of coronation, you said that his 81st birthday will be done in seclusion. So that shows the strength, the myth that comes along with that paramount ruler, the Olubado of Ibadan. He has his pride of place in Yoruba history, and it's taken with a lot of solemn commitment from from stakeholders who know the importance of being the Olubadan of Ibadan. It takes a while, about a decade, to get a successor to be ready to assume that ancestral throne of Olubadan of Ibadan. That tells you that preparing someone for a decade, that means that it's a very, very serious mission that is coming into. And we wish former Governor Rashid Ladoja a most prosperous and exceedingly glorious tenure in his reign as the 44th Olubadan of Ibadan. I wouldn't want to waste much time into a lot of historical fantasies and beauties of the Ibadan history, but Ibadan has its place, has its era of dominance in Yoruba history when it conquered most of the parts, even
Absolutely.
to the south of Dahomey. The Ibadan influence is well felt, so that's why the title is addressed as the Imperial Majesty, the Olubadan of Ibadan. And we wish the incoming Oba, Olubadan of Ibadan, former Governor Rashid Ladoja, a most prosperous reign and a very peaceful one at that in Ibadan land.
Absolutely, and we're looking forward to the pomp and the pageantry. Yes. When the royal family in the UK do their thing, we sit and we watch in awe. Yes. So it's now our turn to witness this coronation. And I'm glad to see that the president will be honoring the occasion. But Yolanda, I'm going to shift my attention to the Guardian newspaper for our final story. So the Guardian newspaper, I would have loved to speak on the political parties, but we'll just breeze past it. Maybe you can take them together. Political parties or SPVs, do we have political parties or special purpose vehicles? This report is all about the row over the rights, multiple dormant parties as INEC considers registering 14 more. We know the history since 1999 of how political parties have increased in numbers. At some point, we got up to as many as 90 political parties before they were trimmed down to 27 in 2015. And then went straight back up again to 91 in 2019, came down again to 18 in 2023. So that's a conversation about whether we need more parties or whether we just need stronger parties. But the real story that I'd love your final comments on, both Yolanda and Benga, is this report that was released yesterday by the Nigerian Safety Investigation Bureau concerning that Abuja-Kaduna train derailment. And in essence, the report is saying that it was poor maintenance. It was poor infrastructure maintenance, operational lapses that led to that terrible accident that we saw. And, this begs the question, we're borrowing money in the name of upgrading and creating infrastructure and so forth, but where is the maintenance culture in ensuring that the infrastructure we already have in existence is kept well functioning and is fit for purpose? So, if you can both briefly touch on each of these issues as we round up.
Sure. First, I'll speak on your previous issue with The Guardian, where the parties are having, a row over who is doing what, all these parties that are popping up everywhere without core values and without offering any, meaningful engagement. I think it's good that we draw the line and we speak about these sorts of things and say that it's great that you can start a party and you can go with your own initiatives, but there have to be certain standards that need to be met. You can't just wake up one day and say, oh, you know what, I have a party and I have an idea and this is what I'm going to do. No, there must be very clear standards and they must be followed. Just as you rightly said earlier on, you can't just have dormant political parties. It seems like it's a distraction from what is actually going on. To touch on the other story, it's quite sad on the security report about how it was poor maintenance that caused the issue. It's really sad to see that because we are here talking about participating on a world scale, and yet we can't even get the bare minimum right. How can we have poor maintenance when it comes to the railway lines, when it comes to transportation that many people rely on? It's actually quite a pathetic situation. Benga.
Okay, I'll quickly say this because of our time. 13 months ago, an alarm was raised on this same route in the Abuja-Kaduna rail line, and it was about infrastructural decay. And nothing much was done to address the missing clips and many of the things that were missing. And we also heard that there was overspeeding on the part of the driver. So In 2022, the Accident Investigation Bureau became National Safety Investigation Bureau, and we expected that should have been proactive. It seems that there is this is a wake-up call for institution relevant agencies attached to ensuring rail safety in the land to wake up and address and forestall many of these things, because if you go into the record, it leaves a very depressing statistics. I wonder, I think I have to leave it at this because my producer has been signaling me and I don't want to get a memo.
The birthday boy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Vimbai. Thank you, Penga. You're watching Daybreak.